If there's one thing you cannot avoid, it's risk. Not taking a risk also constitutes risk. There's risk of complacency. There's risk of paralysis. You can wall yourself up in your room and wrap yourself with bubble wrap, but there's a risk that the world is obviously going to keep spinning and you're not going to grow. So you can't avoid it, but inflation is going to continue to exist. And if society is progressing, the question isn't necessarily, do I need to take risk? The real question is, how do you quantify it? Because if you can measure risk, then you can make educated decisions on what makes the most sense for your life. We can think of maybe the extremities, right? So there's that person that is just reckless and they're always on to the next thing. They're always jumping to the next opportunity and they just can't refine their skill set. They don't actually drive into sharpening their sword, if you will. And there's maybe that other person that's just completely stagnant and they're terrified of change, right? In finance, it's maybe, hey, I'm terrified of volatility. I'm terrified of my money going up and down. And maybe it's, hey, I just want this money to shoot to the moon. But it's a very difficult thing to quantify, especially if you haven't had the experience of going through a negative event financially. So how do we measure it? There's a number of different risk tolerance questionnaires out there. These are forms that you would input data, you'd answer questions to how much loss you'd be willing to take. And the idea is you'll get some return, some answer in return that will say, okay, hey, you should choose this portfolio because this is how much risk you'd be willing to take. And this is your timeline associated with that risk. There's definitely some challenges with this approach. The first is a win is not as big of an emotional event as a loss of the same magnitude, right? So losses sting far more than wins of the same magnitude. They have a far larger emotional impact. And if one hasn't truly experienced a large financial hardship or a poor business decision that lost them a bunch of money, it's going to be difficult to really wrap your head around that when you're filling out these forms. The second thing is you're filling it out just at one point in time, and who knows what was happening to you in that day to maybe say, yeah, I'm feeling great. I feel like I can take on the world. Let's do this thing. Let's roll. Or maybe it was one of those days where you wanted to curl up and say, I think I want to be pretty conservative. So we're going to carry bias with us going into this. In fact, there's going to be bias if it's a male versus a female that's maybe asking these questions, if it's one that's just done vocally with an advisor, for example. So where I like to start is just to understand, what the heck are we trying to do? What's the goal for this money? What is the intention for this money, right? The money is just a vessel that allows us to do the things that we want to do. So what is it that we're trying to do? We need to figure that out first. And invariably, we're going to find some timeline. If we do that, meaning we'll get at least a few of the steps knocked out. But from there, I like to just give people the form. I don't say anything about the questions other than, hey, this is designed just to, get a little bit better feel for who you are as an investor. And I don't tell them anything about it. I don't have any comments on what I think they should be doing with that money before they fill that out. They then fill it out, they bring it back, and I go through it with them. And the reason why I go through it is because there's risk literacy, right? Because if you have no experience really understanding how the market may fluctuate from year to year, how the market can fluctuate from day to day, then when you look at these numbers, sometimes they can be terrifying. Sometimes you say, that's nothing, right? I'd be fine with 30% because I know that it goes up in the long run. History would show that most people can't stay in for the course of time, right? So we know that that's defunct as well. So I always like to have people just fill it out first. And again, going through this and then talking to an advisor about your risk tolerance, because if anything is proven to be true, people seem to have somewhat of an idea what they're investing. A lot of times, I guess they don't, but they really have no idea how much risk they're taking out. And so think of your own plan right now. Think of what it is that you're invested in. And I want you to ask yourself those two questions. What am I invested in? And how much risk am I taking on? Whether it's real estate or your portfolio, your 401k, your IRA, your brokerage account, How much risk are you taking on? Can you actually quantify that? Have you actually taken the time to figure out what the Sharpe ratio is of your portfolio? Have you actually taken the time to look at the beta of your portfolio, whatever measurement you're using for risk? Okay. So we need to quantify that, because the biggest enemy is going to be ourselves. And the challenge with that is everybody seems to view themselves as the exception. So again, risk is unavoidable. It's everywhere. You can't avoid it, but you can make some strides towards quantifying it. And if you quantify it, you can make a lot better decisions for your own plan.